folks. Thanks for signing on so quickly.
Although it was good chit chat.
Great. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to ImageOutWrite's Readout. This is our official Image Out Pride event this year. So happy Pride to everybody who's in Rochester. We do it in July here. If you are not from the area, but joining us tonight and you've had Pride already, please, continue your celebration with us tonight. So I am Michelle Thornton. I am on the board of directors for Image Out. And I am going to start us off just with a couple of announcements about what's going on with Image Out. And then I'm going to pass it off and introduce a couple of people that are joining me. Just as a word, you may have noticed we do have ASL interpreters with us tonight. So you'll want to pin them on your screen. If you don't know how to do that, if you click on the top right by your face, there's a little button that says pin. You can hit that, and that's going to ensure that they're right up near those of us who are speaking. So right, what we've got coming up, a handful of different things this summer. Right now at the Little, we are a community partner for a showing of Summer of '85. This is a great, kind of fun, summery film that we encourage anybody to check out. After that, at the beginning of August, we are partnering with the Jewish Film Festival, and on August 2nd through the 4th, we are partnering with them to show Sublet. That will be both virtual as well as in person on the 2nd. So that's kind of fun and exciting. And then this year, we do have festival dates coming up in October, which is the 7th through the 17th, 10 days. And we are going gangbusters to try and make sure we can do as much in person as we can. But rumor has it there will still be some virtual content for those of you who can't be there in person, aren't comfortable for doing in-person stuff yet, or are just from out of town. So that's kind of what we are doing coming up. I'm going to be throughout the evening posting some different things, links to those events, our website, as well as the link to purchase the book that all of our amazing readers here tonight are published in. That's Image Outright version or edition 9. Ooh, a couple of them showing them up. That's amazing. Thank you. Very cool. So we will publish the link to that as well. We have a community partner joining us tonight, so I'm so excited to introduce Chris Fanning from Writers and Books here in Rochester. Chris, tell us about yourself, what you got going on there, and we really thank you for collaborating with us on this.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Becky, and everybody at Image Out. Hi, my name's Chris Fanning. I'm the Director of Communications, Special Events, and Operations at Writers and Books here in Rochester, New York, home for the literary arts. And we're thrilled to continue to be a community partner for Image Out and Image Outright. This has been a really fun and really important collaboration that we've been working on for years and years and years. And of course, we just started having our first in-person readings just before quarantine. So now we're continuing it in virtual space, which we'll keep doing for as long as we keep putting out these issues. So Writers and Books, we're a literary center. All of our programming is currently online. We have summer camps for youth ages 5 to 18 going all summer long that you can sign up for now. And then we also have adult workshops and a visiting author series that's all virtual and all free. So check that out at our website, wab.org. We also have an independent bookstore called Ampersand Books. That's at ampersandbooks.org. And we drop ship books right from our distributors to your door. So don't go to that other book distributor who we will not even name. Consider supporting the little guy, and the little guy's name, Writers and Books, wab.org. Really looking forward to tonight's reading. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Chris. We're glad to have you here. And throw that link in the chat for sure. The person who is really keeps the machine that is Image Out running is Pamela Dayton, and she is here also, and she's going to share with us some logistics about tonight's event and kind of how to maximize your viewing of this.
Hi, I am going to be honest, I haven't been the boss of a Zoom before, so I'm learning. I believe I can pin the reader and pin the interpreter. So let's try that right now. Pinning, and then I'm also going to pin me. No, I'm not going to pin me, just kidding. I'll pin Michelle. Huzzah! See, do you have two people on your screen, or is it just me?
I think each person will need to do the pinning also. But
this one
yours
is the one
is important because that's for the recording. So yes, that's great.
If you need to have interpretation, please go ahead and pin Jess and or Sarah as they take their turn. And that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Pamela. The other thing I just want to mention is that we will be taking questions throughout the night. So please feel free to pop those in the chat box. And in between readers, I'll be facilitating some of that discussion, sharing that with Becky and Robert, who are going to be facilitating our readings tonight. So with that, why don't we get started? I'm going to hand you off to Becky Wiggins, who is our editor of ImageOutWrite, and she will kind of get the evening kicked off.
Hello, everybody. I'm Becky Wiggins, and I do have, here it is, our copy of our book, which we're going to put a link in the chat if anybody would like a copy. We still have copies from last year. And we're going through some changes this year, ImageOutWrite, and we're looking at new programming, and we're also looking at new an actual mechanism for compiling the book. And so things are going to be a little bit different. So we're actually going to be working on assembling the book sort of as an ongoing basis, but during the fall. And we're thinking that the publication of the book will change. In the past, it had been the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, right before the Image Out Film Festival. But we're thinking in order to spread out the love throughout the year that we're going to try to publish in the spring, actually. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then that will hopefully come right before our mini film festival that hopefully will become another Rochester tradition that we were able to do in May this year. I'm delighted to be here tonight, and I'm delighted to work with these fabulous writers and also get the opportunity to highlight LGBTQ talent, both through Image Out as a volunteer and also through ImageOutWrite as a reader and editor in my participation over the last few years. And Robert, you want to introduce yourself, Robert? I'm actually coming at you from Oneida Lake this afternoon, so I don't know if you can see her this evening behind me. I had the opportunity to go out to a friend's house, and she was like, "We have Wi-Fi out here," and so I'm doing the Pride edition of Readout from Oneida Lake and enjoying that, a swim and all of that. Robert, would you like to introduce yourself for a minute?
Sure. So I'm Robert Bonfiglio. I use he, him, his. I'm on the editorial staff with Becky for Image Out. And like some of the authors tonight, I'm also an educator, and I'm coming from Brighton, New York. And one of our readers is supporting the Cardinals, but I have my little Pride shirt on. So that's my own little plug. But thanks for being here tonight.
Yes, and we actually in Rochester have had our Rock Pride Night at the Red Wings last week, so everybody's got their baseball on their minds, I guess, for this summer Pride. So great. All right, well, we're going to get started. We have 5 readers for you tonight. Sort of unusual, I feel like, for these readouts. We have 4 prose readers tonight. So I love all literature, so not to slight our poetry people, but it's kind of fun to hear multiple pieces of fiction. You're going to hear excerpts. All of the writers that you hear tonight were published in Volume 9, last year's volume. And several of them are reading works that were directly from the volume. So if you're like, hear part of it and you need to hear more, as I said, we've got more books that you can order and you can read the thing in its entirety. Okay, so we are going to start tonight with Clay O. Nyquist. They use they, them pronouns, and they're an Arkansan educator who uses their lifelong fascination with all things sci-fi and fantasy, as well as their experience as a bisexual, bigender person, to inform their works of speculative fiction that center LGBTQ characters. Clay will be reading an excerpt from I Know How This Sounds But, which was published in Volume 9. Clay, take it away.
Thank you so much, Becky. And as an excerpt, I've tried to make it as satisfying as an excerpt can be without reading the whole piece. Just if you want to read the whole piece, go check it out. Thank you. So let's get started here. We can offer you an opportunity to live your life again. They clasped their hands together. What happens is you choose a single moment in your life to change, something that changes the entire course of your life and creates a new reality. It's either that, Dalton, or you stay here for the rest of eternity with the memories of the life you've already lived. I knew the moment I'd relive. I thought about it in one form or another for the past 57 years. To change it meant to change everything about my life. My wife, my children, my friends, the entire trajectory. If I change my life and by some chance my children aren't born, are they? Oh, they'll still exist. They smiled. The creation of a new reality doesn't negate the original strand. In fact, there are many realities in which you do not exist, if that makes you feel better. Thanks. It sounds as if you've decided on something. Yeah. It was a night that should have been like any other night in my early 20s, except that the people I'd call my friends fucked it up. They generated the scheme, and I fell into the trap by reacting the way they thought I would. There were 5 of us. Me, Spencer, Mitch, Donnie, and Adam. I only knew as much as they told me, so I asked to review what I'd missed from leaving the room to piss. Spencer looked at Adam, whose attention was focused on me leaving the room. Then he whispered to Mitch, who snorted beer out of his nose. Donnie was all, what? Before Spencer shushed him, leaned over Mitch, and whispered in Donnie's ear. At this point, Adam had turned around to find them thoroughly conspiring. You're all looking at me like you know something. Adam narrowed his eyes. You see, Adam, Spencer began, punching Mitch in the leg to stop him from laughing. I know a little secret about Dalton. It's not little, it's pretty big. Adam looked to Mitch, who nodded with the seriousness of someone attempting not to smile. And then he looked to Donnie, who raised his eyebrows and pulled down his bottom lip like a fish. You're fucking with me, Adam chanced, suspicious as he had a right to be. I wouldn't joke about something like this, would I, boys? Nope, Mitch shook his head, and Donnie followed up with a no way. Tell me whatever you're lying about, and I'll judge whether or not it's true. Adam stared down Spencer, the only one of us who had the power to challenge him. What I'm about to tell you is top secret information. Dalton told it to me in confidence. Dalton told me. Spencer paused for dramatic effect and to keep his composure. You're sure you want to know? Tell me or don't tell me, I don't care. Adam drank from his cup and spit. Which one of you assholes put fucking cigarette ash in my drink? Sorry, I thought it was empty. Mitch suppressed a laugh that turned into a grunt. I had like at least half of it left, Mitch. I'm sorry, here, have mine. I don't drink Bud Light. Oh, I'm sorry, my taste isn't good enough for you. Spencer slapped Mitch in the chest, and Mitch apologized, rolling his eyes. Adam, he leaned forward, looking around to see if anyone at the party was listening in, before dropping his voice as low as he could manage without it disappearing under the music and conversation. Dalton's in love with you. Fuck off, dude. That's not funny. Adam's lip curled. I'm going to get another drink. No. Adam, I'm serious. Spencer stood as Adam stood. Why would I lie about this? You're trying to fleck with me and it's not going to work. Adam turned to the kitchen and Spencer extricated himself from his seat, positioning his linebacker frame in front of Adam and losing a flip-flop in the process. I'm super serious. He pointed back to the folding table. Just ask them. Mitch and Donnie put on their most believable faces for Adam, and Adam sighed. Why are you telling me this? Because, hey, Spencer lowered his voice and held his eyes as if to convey his point telepathically. Because I know. You know? You know what? Adam blinked, looked to the table, then back to Spencer, who held the same face. Adam, I know. Adam stared at Spencer, attempting to get a read on him. Spencer cut his eyes to where I'd retreated to the bathroom. I know. He waited a half second more than shook his head. You're drunk. Hey, why would I lie about this? I'm happy about it, really. Spencer scratched his head, doing his best to look dejected. I just didn't want you to think I didn't support that kind of thing. But hey, me and Mitch could be the best mans at your wedding. Hey, what about me? Donnie called. Shut up, Donnie. Mitch knocked the plastic cup out of his hand to the floor, already covered in beer and vodka and mud from the people trailing in from the backyard. Adam sucked his teeth and left the room without another word. I knew what the rest of the night looked like. I came back from the bathroom to find the guys laughing, and Donnie nearly told me what they'd done before Mitch tipped his cap off his head and onto the table. When Adam didn't come back, I asked the guys what they did to make him leave. Spencer said he didn't know what I was talking about, and that Adam was off making out with Teresa Eddy. I laughed and put Adam out of my mind. We played a couple rounds of beer hockey until Spencer decided he wanted to go stand outside next to the fire. We followed dutifully, dreaming of what kinds of things we could burn. I had stood, full of beer and whiskey shots, watching the fire dance until I spotted Adam sitting on a bench in a dark corner of the yard. He didn't have the satisfied glow of someone who just made it with Teresa Eddy, and then it occurred to me in some moment of clarity that Spencer had lied to me. I approached the bench, and at this point, I nearly asked for them to stop the playback. It had been so long since I'd seen Adam that I couldn't tear my eyes from this last memory I had of him. He was wearing a red flannel with the sleeves rolled up for the April weather. He had been working on a beard, which was a shade darker from the strawberry blonde on his head. I'd convinced him to come to this party because it was senior year, and even if he had to work on his thesis, he also needed to spend as much time with us because we were never going to get this time back. The bench was slightly wet, and I felt the dampness soak through my pants, remembering the experience as I watched it in front of me. Adam rolled down his sleeves and buttoned them to give him something to do as I sat next to him. What did Spencer do to piss you off? You know, he's just being Spencer. Adam rubbed the tops of his thighs, a sign of exhaustion I instantly recognized from nearly 4 years of pulling all-nighters. I don't want to sound mean, but I'm not going to miss him. After we graduate, the only person I'm going to miss is you. He realized he'd been too honest and rubbed his eyes, putting on an act. Sorry if that sounded weird. I'm just really tired. He placed his hand on the bench next to mine, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel him. We don't have to stay if you don't want to, I offered. It's pretty late, and I know you wanted to get some work done tomorrow. Yeah, I should get work done tomorrow, shouldn't I? Adam had a brightness to his voice. He didn't laugh, but I could tell the amusement from his tone. What are you going to do if you don't get into any of the grad programs you applied to? I scratched the soggy wood beneath my hand. I'm doing that volunteer thing Grant and Erica are doing, except they're going to Dallas. Even if I get into a grad program, I think I'm going to defer a year. Adam removed his hand and crossed his arms over his chest. I felt nervous anticipation grow in my throat, the type of feeling you get when you know something important's happening. Yeah? What are you going to do instead? I don't know. Maybe I'll do that volunteer thing you're doing. Adam swallowed. I just don't want to go straight into the rest of my life so quickly, you know. At this rate, I'll have my master's by 23, and I'll be on track to get my PhD before 30. But I've been thinking about what you said, about never getting this time back. I strained my eyes to look at him, and I felt, even without the knowledge of the events to follow, that I'd remember this moment forever, that this was either the beginning or the end of something. He must have felt my eyes on him because he turned to see me staring, and he must have taken this as a sign that confirmed what Spencer had said, because he moved closer until I processed what he was about to do and jerked back reflexively. I remembered the hurt I read on his face, but I didn't have to remember because it was recreated in front of me in its entirety. I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm drunk and exhausted. Adam acknowledged the moment, then winced, realizing he should have said nothing instead. He looked over to where Spencer and the guys stood, shook his head, then sighed. I'm going to walk back to the apartment, probably throw up, take a cold shower. You know the routine. He stood up, walked toward the house, and left my life. Not until that moment had it registered he tried to kiss me. Adam had talked about postponing his grad school plans and doing what I was doing, and he tried to kiss me. Either he'd pretend it had never happened, defer a year, or he'd accept and I'd see him occasionally until we both fell out of touch and never spoke again. But neither of those happened. None of us ever saw him again. The official theory was that someone offered him a ride back to his apartment, and any number of grisly scenarios followed. I could find out what happened. I could ask to see, but I couldn't because whatever I'd see was my fault, because I wasn't there to stop it from happening. Of course, once we reinstate you into reality, your memories of your old life of this process will not exist. They froze the scene with a wave of their hand. What I require is specifically what you intend on doing to change this so that it becomes a new reality. I want to know something first. I felt my heart clench at the possibility. When you put me back, I didn't think of myself as someone who kissed guys. So even if you can change what I did, can you change what I was thinking? You'll have 1 minute of control, and then you will integrate into your new life. So where do you want me to drop you back in? Right before he leans forward, I felt tears gather in my eyes when he's still on the bench. If that's what you want, you have 30 seconds to change your mind or prepare yourself to re-enter the moment. They waved their hand and materialized a clock, tracing the seconds to 30. The moment I'd imagined my entire life, that I'd rewound and repeated and changed in mental fantasy and cried over, was here. I watched the clock hand hit 30, and with my next blink, I found myself sitting on that bench staring at Adam. The fragility of the moment frightened me, but I managed to force my hand forward, out of a position it'd been cemented in for 57 years. That's not the end of the story, but that's the end of my excerpt.
Yay! All right. Clay, thank you so much. I did not see, Michelle, did you see any questions in the chat? But I had a couple to start us off, and then if anybody else has a question, please put it in the chat. Clay, I noticed a couple things about your writing. One that I find really interesting is you have a real playfulness and a humor in your writing, but you also have these very serious, there's a tension between the serious concepts and the humor and playfulness. So that's one thing that I really enjoyed. And the other one is your characterization and how realistic it feels, but in speculative fiction, right? So like you're crafting really realistic characters and dialogue. So I'm wondering if either of those things are things you might want to talk about in terms of your process or how you approach them.
I really appreciate you appreciating the humor. I found myself trying to write really serious things, but then I get bored or I feel as if it's not working. So that whole contrast of starting with a lighthearted moment and luring you in and then turning it serious, it's something that I've seen a lot with slam poetry when showing my students, that sort of tone shift that kind of throws you off balance. I thank you for noting that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's because you do it beautifully. So thank you very much. And what else are we seeing in the chat here? Amazing dialogue and yeah, wonderfully specific details. Yes. Thank you so much, Clay. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to turn it over to Robert for our next reader.
So thank you so much for starting us off. I'm going to be introducing Alex Carrigan, who is an editor, writer, and critic from Virginia. He has edited and proofed the anthologies Credo, an anthology of manifestos and sourcebook for creative writing, and Her Plumage, an anthology of women's writings from Quail Bell magazine. He has had fiction, poetry, and literary reviews published in Quail Bell magazine, Lambda Literary Review, Empty Mirror, Barrel House, Stories About Penises, Closet Cases, Queers on What We Wear, and ImageOutWrite Volume 9. Thanks for being here, Alex.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. All right, so I will be reading an excerpt of my story from Volume 9. It's called Odessa Remembers. I'm Odessa Arlington, and this has been Odessa Remembers. And cut, PD said, pressing the stop button on the camera and glancing to his camera subject. Before him, seated on a wooden stool in front of a bright green canvas and surrounded by large lighting fixtures, a drag queen sat with her back straight and her legs daintily crossed, like a classic French painter was trying to capture her on a canvas. Okay, and how was that? She asked, her scratchy voice drawing out the last word. Pretty good, PD replied, playing the footage back on the camera's monitor. You're getting these videos down to a science, but not too repetitive, right? No, not at all. Okay, good. The last thing I need is people saying I'm as formulaic as a 90s sitcom. Well, don't worry, Jess, Petey said. You're not there yet. Good. The last thing Miss Odessa Arlington needs is a laugh track and a guest star rating stunt. Petey grabbed the camera, prepared to remove it from the tripod when Odessa raised her hand. Hey, before you take that away, turn the camera out so I can see myself, Odessa said. You saw what you looked like before we started recording. And now I want to see myself again, Odessa insisted, pointing one of her long acrylic press-on nails to her assistant. These lights are hot, and I want to make sure my face isn't melting like a Nazi looking at the Ark of the Covenant. Come on, boo. Petey nodded and stopped trying to remove the camera. He flipped the monitor around so Odessa could admire herself. Odessa's eyes widened, and she began to touch her right temple, right where the lace front of her cumulonimbus-shaped wig was heavily glued onto her skin. Oh, bitch, she slayed this video, she said, pursing her lips, tilting her head, studying all the angles of her face on the tiny digital monitor. You sure did, Petey said, turning the camera back around, much to Odessa's pleasure. He continued to fiddle with the camera on the tripod as Odessa reached for a can of Red Bull sitting on top of the tiny table located just off camera. She moved her large hands past the damp tissues, makeup wipes, powder puff, and tubes of half-used lip gloss that cluttered the table for her drink. She returned to her original position, took a short sip from the straw she had speared through the pop top of the can. You think this will be good as the others? Odessa asked Petey, biting on the end of the straw with her large front teeth. Of course, he replied. People are going to be shocked you actually remembered this kid. I told you, Odessa never forgets, she said, standing up and walking towards the large standing mirror in the corner of the room. It's why I still wake up at night thinking of Nora and that hideous gray and green ensemble from last year's Pride show. I mean, seriously, for a bitch named Nora Easter, you'd think she'd look less like a Nora Easter went right through her closet. Petey chuckled a bit as he watched Odessa check herself out in the mirror. He looked over the wig on her head that looked like she dipped cotton candy in a chocolate fountain, the gold sequined cocktail dress that hugged her padded figure and ended right above her knees, and the tall shoes with heels that looked thin enough to pick locks or perform lobotomies. It was almost comical to be in the presence of such a figure, especially for the kind of work it entailed. This wasn't the sort of assistant job he expected to get right out of college. Of course, it wasn't the sort of thing anyone with a communications degree from a mid-tier university would be hoping for. Petey assumed he'd go work for a television station, maybe work his way up to work in the control room of a major network. But the opportunities were far and few between for someone with little real-world experience, and Petey had left school with too much debt and no invitation to return home to his parents to consider himself too good for whatever he could find. But he had limits. He had to have the kind of job that required more brain cells and skills beyond asking customers if they wanted extra guacamole in their burrito bowls. One dull night, prowling Craigslist under the influence of a few blue moons had led him to a listing for a personal assistant. It seemed like the kind of thing anyone struggling to get by in their town would hope for. Flexible hours, traveling for work, a chance to use all those video editing skills he strained his eyes and back to perfect over countless nights at school, and the promise that it would be way more exciting than anything he could find elsewhere. Excuse me. Naturally, he applied. He was a bit inebriated after all. Petey had never heard of Odessa Arlington before he went to her studio for an interview. Some of his friends at school had mentioned her as one of the performers at a charity drag show that was held in their student center, but Petey really didn't know much else. When he told his friends he had an interview with her, they had collectively flipped out and given him the full rundown. Apparently, Odessa Arlington was a nationally recognized drag queen and entrepreneur. She had won several drag pageants across the country, although more of her success came in their town, where she ran an award-winning dance studio whose teams had competed all over the country. Naturally, Petey was a bit intimidated when he first went to meet Odessa. He had never met any drag queens before. He was a gay man who could respect the art, but he never went out of his way to see shows. Plus, since his friends had stuffed all this prestige and clout down his throat, he was expecting to walk into Odessa's studio as sad Anne Hathaway to her Meryl Streep. To his surprise, when he walked into her office, she wasn't wearing any of the huge wigs or gowns he had seen in the pictures his friend showed him. Part of him thought he'd see this glamorous soap opera villainess waiting for him by the fireplace with a martini in her hand. But instead, he found the sort of 30-something-year-old Texan you'd expect to run a landscaping service or something similar. The decorated and fabulous Odessa Arlington was sitting in a leather office chair wearing a black polo shirt, jean shorts, and tennis shoes. She had close-cropped brown hair. Her face only had minimal makeup on. This was Odessa off-duty, he quickly came to realize. And now he felt really silly for expecting her to be in full drag when they met for the interview. He was allowed to call the gentleman Odessa or Miss Arlington during the interview, and she invited him to use whatever pronouns he wanted for her. She was presenting male, but she told him she didn't really care what she called, so he stuck to female pronouns, which she seemed charmed by, even blushing a bit. But he could see from the business degree on the wall that her real name was Blake Hoffman. But with the effervescent personality she conveyed through the interview, it almost seemed like the name on the degree was a misprint. The job was described quite simply. PD would help develop Odessa's online presence even further than before. Since he was fresh out of school, he could convince her that he was on top of social media trends and platforms. He could talk about what was right and wrong about the accounts for both her drag career and her dance studio, and offer suggestions for improvements and ways to expand her reach. Part of him wondered if Odessa was just going to take the advice and kick him to the curb, but she seemed quite willing to listen, even if she seemed dumbfounded at times. But she trusted him to explain everything and showed great interest in everything he had to say. So he figured he was doing a good job of selling himself. He got the offer a few days later, much to the joy of his friends who began to hound him for chances to meet Odessa. On top of being a media assistant, he'd get to travel with her and help her out with some of her pageants and drag performances, all on her dime. He was surprised to learn how in demand Odessa was, but he could soon see why she had so many fans. As an entertainer, she was hard to ignore. Her dancing was frenetic and technically precise. She could do flips and kicks that made his muscles sore just looking at them. But even when she was lip syncing to current pop songs, he could see just how entertaining she was if handed a microphone. She could randomly talk about anything that came to mind, keeping a hilarious, bug-eyed, pursed-lipped expression combined with her scratchy Southern accent the whole time that had audiences pissing themselves with laughter. With PD's help, Odessa Arlington now had a much stronger social media presence. He filmed everything he could and helped her invest in a better recording setup in her gorgeous loft apartment downtown. PD started to find himself in her home more often than his own. Most of her videos were just about random topics like her childhood or her weirdest hookups on the road. Still, PD couldn't help but find her entertaining, and this busy schedule had made the last 3 years quite fun. He was still screaming by at times, but he did get to travel a lot and meet interesting people. Plus, having the association with Odessa meant he too got more action than he did in college. So he was quite fine with that connection. Odessa's views and social media presence had gone up since he had started, and so she was willing to keep him around and discuss new ideas with him. Okay, once I get this uploaded to the hard drive, we can start on the next video, PD said. PD told Odessa as he took the camera in his hands. He walked over to the computer desk on the far side of the room, passing the racks of clothing and wig stands that lined the walls along the way. He hooked the camera up to the computer and began to export the video file. How long will it take? Odessa asked. Probably just a few minutes. So you're going to give me a few minutes to get ready for the next video? You can take as long as you need, PD said. Are you going to need a lot of time? Oh, nah, she curtly replied. I'm keeping the same face. And wait, but doesn't Mandy read you that? Okay, well, if Miss Mandy Bell wants to read me for my face, I can read her for her face too, she snapped back. I can just remind her that rubber cement is not a substitute for collagen if she wants to come for me. PD chuckled. Okay, well, I'll make sure you have that one written down the next time you see her. Oh, thanks, hon. PD glanced over. Odessa had removed her wig, revealing the skin-colored cap that hid her boy hair, and made her way over to the dress rack. Besides, this is for a good cause, she said. If she wants to read me for my charity work, I'll make sure she has a pillow and headphones on her direct flight to hell. Now, to call it what Odessa was doing charity work was a bit of a stretch, but PD could at least see why she'd be passionate about it. And if you'd like to know exactly what it is, you can read the rest in Volume 9 of ImageOutWrite. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I see in the chat someone's commenting on the portrayal of how the creators are formed, and they seem very real. And they're asking about, characters they'd like to know more about. But I was going to inquire about, like, this obviously seems very theatrical, right? And that's kind of just the nature of what you're writing about. But I was wondering how that process fits into your writing, or like, I don't know if you go to drag shows and are writing down furiously, or how you develop that part.
I mean, pre-COVID, I was going quite regularly, but I don't know. I just always like writing to perform. Like, I don't do it a lot, but I always like the pieces I tend to read aloud are the ones that I feel I can go the most extravagant with. Like, obviously, I am not skilled enough to keep a consistent accent, but just talking like how I imagine Odessa is fun, and trying to contrast that with the straight man PD was great. Yeah, I don't know. I just always find it more fun and engaging with the audiences if I'm just really doing as much as I can when I'm sharing my work.
Great. And Becky's also asking, what's the most fascinating part of the drag experience that you try to capture in your writing?
I mean, really, it's just the way they talk. Like, everything is very dramatic. It's very comical. It's witty. It's sharp. It's quick. And it's very almost shameless. Like, you almost just let them say it and then realize, like, okay, yeah, that person strung those words together and just spat it out there. Okay, sure. I don't know. And I just really like to figure out like the most creative things I could possibly say in response to something.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm gonna turn over to Becky now for our next reader.
Yes, thank you, Alex. That was so fun. And again, if you would like to read the rest of Odessa's story, it is lovely, and you should check it out in volume 9. There it is. Thanks, Robert. Okay, our next reader is going to delight us with some of his poetry. Our reader is Kevin Lane Dearinger. He, his, or his pronouns. He's a retired Broadway actor, singer, and English teacher. The best of all professions, if I do say so myself. His publications include 3 theatrical biographies and an LGBTQ memoir, Bad Sex in Kentucky. That sounds like one you got to read as well. He has written several plays. His poems keep time with his Kentucky heritage, his love of family, his sorry, I am like tripping over that tonight, LGBTQ identity, and his own erratic pulse. Kevin's second memoir, On Stage with Betty Davis, A True Story, will be out this fall. Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. 2 of Kevin's poems that he's going to be reading tonight come directly from Volume 9, and one is a new one to us that we haven't heard. So thank you, Kevin.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. Are you hearing me? I was having I was having connection problems, so I was moving around. I do have 2 poems that I'm very pleased were published in the magazine. The first revisits a painful first relationship, a college love affair that went badly, as college love affairs tend to. And more than 50 years later, there's still a sting. But the gentleman involved, we still communicate, first by letters and then by email, but we're very careful how we word it. When I was growing up, when the nuns got really bored with teaching, we would do letter writing all afternoon, and they would teach us the formal way to write a letter, which started with a salutation, then the body, and then the complimentary close. So that informs this piece. It's called Fondly Yours. We know now, of course, that we rushed in lust to quickly kindled love, firing up that tender word too soon for sense, too late for logic, as if we were the first to need its license for shedding the stricture of tight jeans and turtlenecks in the woolly itch of desire. Such is the singled out reasoning beneath the youthful terror of being lost and left behind. So, when it crumbled all to hell on crumpled sheets, a reversion to aversion, requiring the polite tactics of prophylactic words and tactful adverbial gloss, we resorted as a final retort to a foolish fondly and a yours, never ours. As bitter ends to nervous letters of revulsion and expulsion from the double-bedded Eden of skin-scorched passion, leaving us chilled and naked, at a loss and human, untethered and undone, searching tenderly for completion in a complimentary close. That's that one. And jumping ahead, I was going to say to the end of my life, but I hope not, but to somewhat later. This is a poem that was written, the first draft. All of these poems have been rewritten and just over and over. I never settled on a first draft. But this was inspired by an incident at Pride 2 years ago, pre-COVID. I was on my bicycle back here in my hometown in Lexington, and I was coming home, and a very nice, very young man, I'm 70 years old, he's 21, very drunk, came up to me. I knew him almost not at all. I knew him from political fundraisers. And suddenly he kissed me, and he kissed me hard and long. Being an older person, I was incredibly embarrassed. And also had my legs on either side of the bicycle, so I couldn't get away from it. And it was terrible. And he knows that I wrote this poem, by the way. I shared it with him. And this is what came out of that. It's called A Sort of Pride at the Corner of Mechanic and Upper. I am not at all sure when the terrible thought first tripped up expectation, but I do know that in some dreary time, I do know that for some dreary time I have worried with each kiss as it comes, will this be the last? Attractions fade both ways, and unless you have made plans, like the grasshopper's ant in the tail, intimacy retreats with age. Old lovers gone are not replaced, except by their ghosts returned as fractured facsimiles. Was it, I ask, feeling their presence, lifting my mind away from the now into a nostalgia of dishonest reverie, like this, the first time, long past? And will this, in fact and spirit, be the last moist and tender lip that searching touches mine, the last shared breath, the last surge of carnal courtship that yearns from body to body in a simple act of meeting with a wordless reach? And what was once an invitation and exercise of youthful arrogance remains a reminder of the annihilation that flowers out of longing. Once more, once more, once more, before the heavy lid falls and I am devoured. Okay, it's a little self-indulgent. This third poem, which has not been published, but I'm fond of it and I wanted to read it, so bear with me. My book, can I plug my book? Just shake your head. Bad Sex in Kentucky, is not about bad anatomical sex. I lived in New York for many years. Somebody suggested that I write Marginally Better Sex in Manhattan as a follow-up. But it's about growing up gay in a very repressed society where any kind of intimacy was considered evil and gay wasn't even talked about. And one of the things I address in this book, or tried to think about in this book, was the lack of role models growing up. I didn't know what gay was because we didn't know any gay people, which is why when I became a teacher, it was very important for me to be out to my students. They needed to see that I was a human being and I could have good days and bad days and be cranky and funny and nice and not predatory and just a good human being. I hope I am anyway. So anyway, this is called Subculture. Lavender laughter late in the night, soft-souled loafers light, pronouns carefree with chorus boy glee, and wrists unleashed, so many cliches, roll out of the past like stringless pearls dropping gin-soaked into Dorothy's ginghamed lap, and $3 bills well spent on pansies, as Betty puffs unfiltered bitchery, and Tallulah trolls the liquored up darlings as prelude to show tunes, staying all night to sing them all, with a tap break at midnight in a fruity headdress, clackety yak, staccato and shrill, a hissing hysteria over cocktails swirled and cigarettes finger twirled, stirring the downtown scent of uptown cologne, and a late night prance in tight green pants, tricked out to flit in mincing words and schoolyard wounds, while fairies dance at the bottom of the garden. Such raucous rebellions falling semi-straight into line with doctors hypocritical and preachers hypocritical, who presume to tell us who we are. How very, very queer you think, not daring to think at all, at all, at all. That's it.
Yay! Oh, Kevin, thank you so, so much for sharing those with us.
Thank you for
Yes, there's many
indulging me.
many comments in the chat. So let me go back. There's a couple of questions here, I think. So a lot of people sighing, a lot of people saying, yes, you're striking the chord of emotion with them. It's just wonderful, terrible and amazing. And there's a question here. Kevin, do you always share your poems with the inspirations of them, like the second one you talked about? Do you have any stories about how that exchange went in a way you didn't anticipate?
The exchange on the bicycle?
Yes, or the way, but maybe also about telling this person that you were going to write this poem. I don't know.
To answer the first part of the question, I actually write poems that I hope they will stand on their own without too much explanation. But since I was reading it and you can't see it, not everyone can see it, I thought it was important to give a little bit of background. I'm also old, so I'm always afraid that my references are just flying over people's heads and they don't get them, because I don't think anybody studies the formal art of letter writing anymore. So the whole, it's not a joke, but the turn at the end is, you sort of have to know that term. The last poem, I'm still uncomfortable with, because it basically is revisiting every cliche that made me uncomfortable when I was growing up. Because I kept thinking, is that who I am? Is that who I am? Is that who I am? And when I first came out, it's what you were expected to be. You had to know all those references to be a cool gay guy. And since I've never been cool at all, it was confusing to me. And I now have time to think about it. As far as the young man is concerned, we're still friends. He keeps wanting to have dinner and I haven't done that yet. I'm old enough to be his great-grandfather and he knows it. So I don't think he's pursuing me romantically. I think he simply wants to be friends and he's a little embarrassed that he behaved that way. But he's an incredibly bright young man who knew exactly why I wrote the poem. So when I shared it with him, he was very, very pleased about it. So he didn't throw anything at me.
That's great. Yeah. And then more sighs in the chat. And one comment is nice Emily Dickinson twist there. Somebody can identify, Nancy can identify. She says, although I'm older than you, I, so feel what you're writing. And then let's see, here's another question. Oh, where can we purchase Bad Sex in Kentucky?
That sounds like a loaded question. You'd have to come to Kentucky to present it.
I don't know. You might not have sold it right there, but
it's published by a small publishing house called Rabbit House Press, and you can order it through them. And you can also get it on Amazon, and it's not terribly expensive. There are some harrowing sections in it. I mean, not everything that happened in my life is very pleasant. But I also hope it's with a sense of humor. And it continues a bit in the memoir that's coming out in the fall, which is with a different press, which is about acting with Betty Davis and being this nervous, unsure gay man in New York for my first month in New York. So it sort of continues without sex, though it hints at it. It mentions that I come home late in cabs. I'm horribly discreet.
Yeah, you have to dangle it a little more. Like, oh, it's in there. You've got to read it and find out.
But there are sections that my sister reminds me when we're back in my small hometown, which is a little town about 12 miles from here, when we're there together having lunch and people say, I read your book. She said, well, you put it in there, so they're going to know things about you that they didn't. So there you go.
Yeah.
But I only had one elderly relative still alive when the book came out, and she has since passed away. A very religiously conservative aunt who I'd never come out to anybody other than my parents and my siblings, none of my family. And I moved away instead, which is what you did in those days. And I was very worried what she would think, and she's in there quite a bit as well. She was a very well-known softball player. And she said, I'm taking too much time, sorry. I was terrified she was gonna go after me for being gay or whatever. But all she said was, Kevin, honey, You say in here that we had to go into these pool halls to go looking for my third husband. Honey, those weren't no pool halls, them were beer joints. So, yeah, so, and I've written poetry about her too. I read it at her funeral. So enough of me, that's enough.
That's great.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. And a couple more comments from Clay here in particular saying, you know, thank you so much for speaking out about the lack of representation. As an openly out English teacher, it's so inspiring to hear about your work in your life. And so, you know, we very, very inspiring to those of us in education, for sure. And then great Southern accent. So yes, all around, Kevin, a delightful reading. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you very much.
Back to Robert for our fourth reader.
Okay, we just got hit with a crazy thunderstorm up here, so I'm going to go quick before I get cut off by the noise. But the fourth reader is Joe Bauman, whose fiction and essays have appeared in Phantom Drift, Passages North, Emerson Review, Another Chicago Magazine, Iron Horse Literary Review, Electric Literature, Electric Spec, On Spec, Barrel House, Zone 3, and many others. He is the author of Ivory Children, published in 2013 by Redbird Chapbooks. He possesses a PhD in English from the University of Louisiana Lafayette. He was a 2019 Lambda Literary Fellow in Fiction. His first short story collection, The Plagues, will be released by Cornerstone Press in 2023. And here he is. Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you for that, Robert. And just so you know, I just want to say, even though I'm wearing my Cardinals regalia, I was actually born in Ossining, New York, and was a Mets fan throughout my first about 8 years of life before I was consigned to the Midwest. So you know, there's like they're 1-2 in my book. So, well, thank you to everyone who organized this. I appreciate everyone who's here as well. Just like Clay and Alex, I'm going to read about the first third of my story. Unlike Clay, I was really lazy and didn't pick fun parts. I'm just reading the first several pages. So if you want to read the whole thing and find out what happens, get yourself a copy of the book. So this story is called A River in Your Chest, and why that's the title will become clear here in a second. I'm actually reading on my computer because I find that easier for me than out of manuscript. So if it looks like I'm staring weirdly at the screen, that's just because that's what I'm looking at. So here we go. Carnegie stutters awake thanks to the slippery, crawling feeling in his chest. He presses his fingers together into a duckbill shape and starts massaging the bony plate of his sternum where the muscles knit together, moving his hand up and down. The water kicks back into flow. Among others, this is a downside of having water in his veins. It likes to pool when he falls asleep. Renewed circulation always leaves him cold, so Carnegie shoves back the blankets and hauls into the bathroom. One advantage, no swirl of color and light from the sudden change in his blood pressure, and turns on the shower, waiting for steam to purl out from the stall. Carnegie washes his hair and armpits and back, though he knows he'll still smell like a swimming pool when he gets out. His water is briny with ocean. A text message is waiting for him, a winky face from Bradley, along with morning salutations. He smiles, and for a moment, the water in his veins feels a touch warmer, like a faucet in his heart has finally clicked toward hot. He dresses in front of the sliding mirrors of his closet doors, wondering if the weather is nice enough for him to sit in the backyard this afternoon. Carnegie hates a lot about his body, despite what Bradley says. The sight of water rushing just beneath the surface of his skin, swirling across his body like it's being sucked through a long, winding tube, makes his stomach lurch. Through the paleness of his flesh, the water takes on a greenish tinge, like it's funky with algae. It makes him feel tainted. When he manages to tan even just so, the color reverts to a stoic aqua. The visible movement slows, and he doesn't worry as much about taking his clothes off when Bradley stays the night. His composition class at 9:30 is a good group. They show up on time, and most of them answer his questions. The students are young and saffron-hued thanks to summers at the beach and lake houses. The ones with water in their veins, 3 of them by his count, are hard to separate from the rest. But he can see the signs. Despite the darkness of their skin, he catches the periodic flicker of movement along their forearms. One of them, a girl named Lily, wears tank tops, and the outline of where her bathing suit slid over her shoulders all summer reveals tiny flashes of blue pulsing near her clavicle, little shots of color like Morse code. As he passes back their first essay drafts, he talks about the problems in them. The lack of clear theses, drop quotes, failure to provide examples and elaborations. He wonders, as always, who is paying attention to him and who is staring at his throat, making no attempt to hide their fascination with the cyan of his jugular vein. When he dismisses the class early, all of you go to the library and find another source for your paper. Lily hangs back, pretending to search for something in her bag while her classmates file out. Dr. Hoffman? Yeah? She won't look him quite in the eye. In her hands, she's curled her paper into a tight periscope. I just wanted to say I like the color of your water. His mouth goes dry, as if the liquid that runs through him has spilled into his mouth, the salt sucking away all the moisture. He's been propositioned by students only 2 other times. Once while he was in graduate school and a former student asked him out for coffee via email. He never responded. And then again during his first year at his current job, when a young woman who seemed to have only ever learned about student-teacher interaction from bad movies, or maybe porn, slid into the chair in his office in a low-cut billowy blouse and leaned forward, one hand playing at the loose lock of hair, and asked if there was anything she could do to get an A. He'd leaned away from her and suggested she visit the writing center before submitting her research paper. Carnegie works his jaw and gives Lily a brief nod. She's short, and he only now notices a tattoo on the back of her left hand. A flower, of course. He can't tell if its blue tinge is because of the ink or the water running through her. She catches his stare and covers her left hand with her blank right one. We have a club. Oh? Those of us who are, you know. She looks at her arms where water pulses just so. It's like a support group, but we can't get school funds unless we're official. It's bureaucratic. Yeah, and to be official, we kind of need an advisor. I see. We were wondering if you might be willing. Carnegie feels his pulse go chilly. Water skips through his heart and ribs, pouring into the center like there's a river in his chest. Can I get back to you? Lily chews her lip, then says, sure. We wouldn't need much. You don't even have to come to our meetings, just sign paperwork. Not that we wouldn't want you there. She unclasps her hands, revealing the flower again, as if this is some kind of bargaining chip. The flower is, of course, a lily. The petals have the signature curling dip on the ends, the dark stamen poking up like little antennae. And there's no one else, he says. It comes out a statement, not a question. He's been to enough meetings to know that he's the only one of his ilk on the faculty. Lily, thinking he's asking her a question, shakes her head. Her hair matches the midnight color of her tattoo. Along her cheeks, a pair of cerulean waves break out, water cresting across her skin, a sad, obvious blush. Bradley calls at 5:30. Carnegie is stripped naked, hidden on his back porch thanks to the privacy fence the last owner installed, underwear bunched over his groin. He can feel the burn on his skin, which has gone a bitch-slapped pink all over, his underarms and buttocks tender. Did I forget about us doing something? Carnegie says by way of greeting. No. Oh, I just thought I might come over. Carnegie struggles to pull on his boxer briefs, toes tangling in the material. Oh, okay. When? I'm actually out front. I knocked on the door. Carnegie feels his pulse quicken. I'm out back. Come around. They hang up. Carnegie can feel water whooshing through his ears, numbing up his toes, still cold despite the hour in the sun. His skin has absorbed all that heat, leaving nothing for the rest of him. Bradley appears, undoing the latch on the fence gate. He presses himself against Carnegie's chest, the tweed of his sports jacket itching at Carnegie's skin. Carnegie holds him as tight as he can, Brad's sleeves bristling against his arms, shooting little sad shocks through him. You're warm and cold at once, Bradley says, sighing. His whole body relaxes like he's made of limp noodles. I love that. Bradley flattens a hand against the center of Carnegie's back, his fingers soft, lotioned. Carnegie finds his t-shirt. He doesn't bother about pants, they're inside anyway. His legs will just have to absorb more sun, which is good. Along his thighs, the water is still vaguely visible under the tangles of blonde, dusty hair. At his ankles, knots of blue-green whoosh around the bones like ribbons, his body a package waiting to be unwrapped. Bradley orders a pizza while Carnegie showers, scrubbing away the silt of sweat that has accumulated on his chest and back and under his arms. He's about to turn off the water, but then without warning, Bradley shoves the shower curtain to the side and steps into the tub. The space is small for two, and they quickly become an unsexy tangle of jarring elbows and kneecaps. Bradley is lean, shorter, but but his shoulders are wide, arms long. What muscle clings to his body isn't covered by even a sliver of jiggling body fat, and Carnegie always bubbles with the tart tinge of jealousy at the utter smoothness and crag of Bradley's midsection, the left side of which is partially covered by a wavering black tattoo of a rose bush. It swirls around his oblique, thorns pointing toward his belly button. Carnegie remembers Lily's tattoo and her request and feels a quick surge of nausea. But then Bradley slides his arms around Carnegie, just below his ribs. They stand in the water in silence until it goes lukewarm, and as the water trails down his legs and into the drain, Carnegie feels his worry swirl and wash away. And that is where I will stop.
Thank you. I think I was struck by that most just about the detail you put in. It almost like kind of read or sounded like poetry, even though it's not. But I think I was going to ask, like, in terms of your descriptive passages versus your dialogue, do you find yourself putting more time or effort into one or the other? Because I don't know if your dialogue almost seemed like it was glue for everything else you were trying to put forth.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this was a really tricky story for me to write. I wrote like 4 different versions of this until I kind of landed on the one that's the final version. Like there was a whole thing with Bradley getting evicted from his house that I don't think is in the final version. I actually don't remember because it's been a while since I wrote it. But in terms of like those descriptive things versus the dialogue, yeah, with this story, I sort of started with all of these in my head, at least. I don't know if they came out onto the page in this order, but just like I had this idea of like, what if some people had water instead of blood? And I had all of these images in my brain that I wanted to get into the story somewhere. And I really like writing with and about color, just and coming up with, and it really, to me, the fun challenge of that is like, how does blue become a very essential word in this story, but how do I not use the word blue, right? Does that make sense, right? Like all these other ways of doing that. And so I think I had a lot of these, I want this image, these different things to be in there. And it just took a while working those in, but I also kind of knew as I was writing what this relationship was like. And like you said, that dialogue kind of acting as, because I couldn't just write a story that was, let me describe a person who's got water in their body for 15 pages, right? That's not a story. And so, but the way they interact together and the way Carnegie and other characters interact together kind of was my way of bridging between those various bits of description. They kind of came up together at the same time almost. But definitely the imagery that I incorporated, that was where the story started for sure.
Thanks. I also like hearing you, definitely blue was at the forefront, but
good.
Yeah, it was there. You're also being praised for your word building and
thank you.
The lyrical aspect of it. And Clay has asked if you had a particular inspiration.
I'm sure I did. At the time, what often happens to me when I'm trying to write is there are 2 things I absolutely have to start off is I need some first thing, like the first line, and I need a title. And that actually is what I can't feel like I can be writing endlessly on something and just not feel settled until I've got those 2 things. In this case, I think I tend to wake up sort of weird. There's a term for it. I have hypnic jerks all the time. And so I was like, it started with that idea of stuttering awake. And then somewhere, and I honestly can't remember who, I heard the phrase, a river in your chest. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, the way that I like to write is I like to take weird things like that quite literally. And it's like, okay, well, what if there's just water in someone's body? And that's kind of where the story started. And like I said, this thing underwent too many changes for me to even remember what the final draft looks like entirely until I read the whole thing, because I just can't remember, because there were so many different pieces that I was, let me try this, nope, let me try this, nope, and then I finally settled on where it goes, and that's the version that's in the book. So that's kind of where I don't know if that answers the inspiration question, but it was really kind of getting that title and that feeling of that stuttering awake thing is where it all started.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
We can drum roll for Becky for our final.
Yes, final one. And Joe, I just want to say too how much I enjoyed reading that story before its publication. I think that for me it was so interesting because there's gay characters in the story, and yet the entire story is an allegory for being queer. And I thought the scene where the student comes, I'm also an English teacher, right? So like that's exactly like having the students come and ask you to be the GSA advisor, right? Which has happened to probably many of us over who are working in educational institutions. So
there was a slightly autobiographical element of that. I am on my campus of 100 full-time faculty, the one out queer member of the faculty, and so when those events are happening, and I sort of got pulled into being the, not that I don't like it, but it was like, oh hey, you'd be perfect for this, and I was like, well, okay, and then will you speak at this thing and do this thing, and you know, the parts that I didn't get to read of the story, there is a section where the main character is kind of thinking or ruminating on that sort of stuff, and honestly, I didn't actually think that you know, until I wrote that line that I read of that he can see the three others in the class because he can see these things about them. The idea of having it be this parallel for being sort of this almost tokenized queer person on an overwhelmingly not queer campus. You know, I'm in suburban Missouri, let's be real. That hadn't occurred, and I was like, well, I might as well lean into it, right? As I kept writing. So yeah, that was kind of where that came from.
I mean, I really identified with that because then you're like, really, there's nobody else, and then also the questions about who should be serving in those positions. Should it be the other queer faculty, right, or should it be somebody else? Like, why necessarily does that, you know? So it was really interesting. I really appreciated it. So thanks.
Great.
And that brings us to our last reader of the evening. So our last reader is Manny Igrejas, and he uses he, him pronouns, and his fiction is included in the anthology Men on Men 4, 34th Parallel, Chelsea Station, and of course, Image Out. Poetry is included in a new geography of poets. His plays, Shrinkage, Kitty, and Lina, were both favorably reviewed in the New York Times. Miss Mary Dugan and Hassan and Sylvia won the Best Play Awards at the 2010 and 2011 Fresh Fruit Festivals. Margarita and Max was named Best Short Play in 2013 Midtown Festival. NSA was an O'Neill semifinalist in 2013, and other plays include Instamacy, Doofus Chair, How to Make a Million, and Pittsburgh. He was a theatrical publicist for many years, and if you've heard of the Blue Man Group, then he did his job. So welcome, Manuel, and he's actually going to be doing a very exciting thing and reading some new work as well that was not published in Volume 9. So welcome, Manuel.
Thank you. The story in the anthology was lovely, and it took me a year to write, but as soon as I finished it, I wanted to get away from that guy, that sad, lonely guy in Lisbon, and write about sexy people in show business. So the story I've been working on is called Inside Show Business, which I know something about, and it's set in a theatrical PR office in 1990. This scene is the backstory of one of the characters. His married boyfriend, Travis Finkelbaum, had stopped paying his rent and moved on to someone younger and prettier. Oh well, there's not a lot of honor in the world of kept men, nor was there a union or a complaint department. Carlos fell behind in the rent and got a warning from the super. He needed money and was getting desperate. There was a help wanted sign by the register at the Duane Reade a few blocks away on 6th Avenue, so he talked to a surly female cashier who called the manager on the intercom. The manager was a short, round, brown man with a clipped accent and a name tag, Gavin Pinderloo. After a few abrupt questions, he was hired. Carlos noticed that Gavin and the cashier looked alike. She was his sister. This Duane Reade grew like a split-level tumor out of the West 4th Street subway station, or it may have been dropped there from a great height, another planet perhaps, and never settled itself. Its main entrance smelled of piss and was haunted by a scrawny crackhead who shook an angry cup at you when you entered. A layer of dust and grime covered the narrow aisles and sparsely stocked shelves. The surly female cashier, Prudence Pinderloo, gave him a clipped lesson on working the register and was annoyed when he asked questions. The rest of the staff seemed to be Pinderloos as well. Carlos was planted at the high impact register and struggled to figure it out. Surliness oozed down like acid from the Pinderloos, and the customers felt it. The Pinderloos were from Guyana, and Carlos suspected it was French Guyana, where they had managed the Duane Reade on Devil's Island. Gavin's mother, Pretty Pinderloo, worked at the store part-time. She was a tiny woman with a sweet round face and wore her gray hair in a ponytail over a foot long. She spent her time humming while she dreamily tickled the empty shelves with a feather duster. When Carlos brought a pile of boxes to the back room, he bumped into her and knocked her glasses off her face. They fell onto the floor and he unwittingly stepped on them. After that, none of the Pinderloos spoke to him. Carlos found that he liked dealing with customers who were a mix of sturdy Greenwich Village regulars, some actors. There was Jessica Lange, people he recognized from television, visual artists with paint-splattered sweatshirts and itinerant psychos. One day, his poetry idol, Edward Fields, stood before him at the register. He was buying Colgate toothpaste. Carlos recognized him from one of his book jackets, even more handsome in person with his penetrating eyes and soothing voice. Shocked and flustered, Carlos couldn't think of a thing to say. His previous experience in customer service as a companion was intensely one-on-one, and from that he learned how to talk to people and attempt to give them what they wanted. Though he wasn't the most efficient cashier and could never figure out coupons, the customers preferred him to the brusque Pinderloos. He hated the exhausting job, but he was able to make that rent that month. On Valentine's Day, he was on duty for 8 hours when every last-minute shopper below 14th Street jammed the store to buy last-minute heart-shaped boxes of Russell Stover's cheap, thoughtless candy, thoughtless cards, and faded red roses for their beloveds. Thoughtless candy. Ooh, that was a poem. Since he never loved anybody, he didn't care about Valentine's Day. His register jammed several times, and Gavin angrily fixed it without even looking at him. The lines of last-minute lovers snaked through the narrow aisles and thrummed with anger and frustration. Everyone was making New York minute calculations about each other's time stood still in the prison break light. The thrumming was punctuated by peppy computerized voices promoting Valentine's specials and flu shots. The smell of the cheap chocolate seeped from the bright red heart-shaped boxes and gave him a headache. When he got a short bathroom break, he went to the pain reliever aisle, but the shelves were empty and Mother Pinderloo was dreamily massaging them with her feather duster. After 5 hours of his 8-hour shift, red hearts swam before his eyes, and he began to hallucinate. He thought of Ferlinghetti's poems, a Coney Island of the mind. He seemed to have fallen into a Duane Reade of the soul, an existential sinkhole where everything is advertised but nothing is available on the dusty puke green shelves, a place where kindness shriveled like the ancient roses and dignity was impossible without a fight or a loss of self-respect. He was ashamed of himself for having this crappy job and being bad at it, for having no Valentine on this idiotic, manipulative holiday. He was drenched in flop sweat and feared that either he or the store would implode, collapsing onto the subway tracks below. He rang up the last dozen withered roses and remembered a line from one of Ferlinghetti's poems. And that's the way it always is, and that's the way it always ends. The fire and the rose are one. Those lines, the fire and the rose are one, became his mantra. The fire and the rose are one. They calmed him and got him through his shift. He punched out at 10 p.m. and crawled into bed where he hid the whole next day. When Gavin called to find out where he was, he quit. I knew you were a pussy, Gavin said. That's it.
That's so great. Thank you. I was just looking for my mute button there. Thank you so much for sharing that new story. Is that part of a much longer work, or is that part of a yes?
It's another story I'll be working on for another year, and I took this section out of it.
Fantastic. And again, we see like this rich characterization with these people in the store and the narrator, and you're really putting us into again like a bit of humor in their descriptions, I think. So.
Well, actually, I had a job at the Duane Reade for a month where it was one of the darkest times of my life. So I want to get that off my chest.
Yes, and in the chat, I'm seeing somebody else. Kevin is saying, as a longtime New Yorker, I love the use of Duane Reade. That was fantastic.
For everywhere.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. Can you tell us where this one's going since it's in production, or maybe something about your process of writing a story like this? Or
I finished the first draft that I want to. I'll just write through get to the end to know what's happening, and then I like to go back in and just fuck things up, change things. Because I'm making up this world, so I can put anything I want in it, including that scene. I don't have much formal education in writing. It's like a big brontosaurus. I just pound on the keys and come up with stuff and hope it works and roll my way through it.
Well, it's working. Whatever your process is you're doing it, and we're loving it. So we really appreciate it. And we thank you so much for your participation tonight. And if anybody else has any questions, you can throw them in here as we wrap up for the evening. But Manny was our last reader for the night. And again, we want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Happy Pride. In Rochester, we do Pride differently. It's in July. Everybody else is already done with their Pride, but we're still celebrating here in Rochester. So feel free to come on up and celebrate with us. And we again want to thank Chris Fanning and Writers in Books for their support. I want to thank Michelle for being here and starting us off this evening, and for the fantastic support that Image Out has given to the literary arts and our queer publication, ImageOutWrite. We hope to see you all at future readout events. We will publicize those and invite you to read again in the future, and share the links that were in the chat. There's some really interesting, if you want more summer reads, we've got some links there. So I guess if that's it for everybody. Alex, did you want to say something? Oh, I didn't know if you were just waving or you wanted to. Yes, so lots of appreciation in the chat. Thank you all so much. Yes, and tonight's recording will be posted on social media soon. So you can follow Image Out either on YouTube or on social media to find the link if you want the recording to share with people. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you so much, and we hope to see you again too. Happy Pride. Keep being your awesome selves out there and representing for the community. We love you. We appreciate you. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Night.